Welcome back, friends. It's another episode of The Mindful CEO. I'm your co-host, Chris Angel, and I'm joined by my other stellar, beautiful, handsome co-host, Hendon.
Yes, Chris, thank you. I was noticing, I now must go back to a full beard because we really cannot be the two white guys with mustaches.
No,
Just can't.
I love it so much. Don't shave it. Don't lose it.
I just feel like it's too much. First of all, I have to dye it, it's just too much. It's too fun. It's like you show up at a party and someone's wearing the same shirt. That's how it was for me today. And I don't usually mind that, right? I know my women generally hate that more without being sexist about it. But at any rate,
you, Aaron.
Things are good. Yeah, I'll be me. All right, good. And then today we have Andy Neillie, Dr. Andy Neillie, which is super, super exciting. And I really, really appreciate your being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. And Andy is a leadership thought leader. And Chris, I said you were going to set this up, but now I'm lying because I'm already talking. So.
Oh, well, I just wasn't ready to get to the prompt yet because we just want him to introduce himself.
Oh, fine. All right, great. Andy, why don't you introduce yourself? Good. There you go.
So I'm Andy Neillie. I'm not sure I'm a thought leader, but I've been passionate about good leadership since early in my career. It wasn't even my career, early in my jobs when I had some bad bosses. And my faith is important to me. And I'm reading these biographies about this servant leader. And then I'm going to work and I've got a guy with anger management issues who's taking it out on me and my coworkers. And it just ignited in me what makes a good leader a good leader. And 5 million frequent flyer miles later, I've traveled the globe talking to leaders about what makes good leaders good leaders. So if there's a thought leader out there, it's those people that I've had the chance to interact with over the last 25 years.
Well, that's a great segue to the prompt, Aaron, because I feel like part of my premise in life is when leaders lead, the world will change. When people who have learned some things in life has taught them some things, begin to share the things life has taught them, that in fact is leading. Whether you want to wear the label or not, you are a leader. And I can hear for you, Andy, just like, I appreciate the humility and being a thought leader is simply being someone who has thoughts that are out in front of where most people currently operate. And you have four leadership necessities. You even have distinguished some of this for yourself. And so you are leading thought into the future about some particular angles and nuances to leadership. And I think that might be worth exploring here. So
first of all, Chris, when I've had a really tough day and I've been beat up by clients and life, can I just reach out to you and have you remind me again that I've done some stuff?
Yes.
That's right. Well, so
hang on, I want to say something about that because that I know you said it, tongue in cheek, but that really is one of the things that we are out building is that kind of a community. That you've heard that you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with. That we are no man is an island. That we are a function of the people we are with, and you're in our community now, so that's no kidding. We really do got your back, whether you're listening to the show or you're on the show or whatever. If you need someone to remind you who you are, and if you don't think you need someone to remind you who you are, then you're really not present because we all get, I've been sort of railing on this with my team is that we all have PhDs in being a dick with ourselves, just all really good.
Well, and even in y'all's website, there's a thoughtfulness that shows up, and you go to other people that are talking about leadership, and it's snazzy and fast and powerful, and then the way you present yourself is let's just slow down and exhale together a little bit, and so I think that comes through even in your initial communication with folks.
It's great, Andy, and I appreciate you saying that, and. Yeah, and I would be surprised if in the necessities we couldn't hear that, just given our relationship. And I just know that that's there, especially, given your the sign behind you: lead well, pray often, stay humble. That's I
do these leadership intensives here locally in Austin every so often with a small group of 10 or 12 emerging leaders, and kind of our capstone exercise. Everybody gets a placard with that because something you said a minute ago, Chris. I think the best leaders they better have a degree of humility to them, because if you haven't been beaten up by life yet, you will get beaten up by it. And that, in some respects, that part of my crusade these days is to help people recognize celebrity influencers are not the leaders that people really want to follow at times. Just because you've got 100,000 followers on TikTok, that doesn't mean you have anything to say. And so I think I've got a couple of brothers in arms who resonate with that. And these 4 leadership necessities are really not anything new. It's simply kind of my voice. For some people, this construct becomes helpful. People that are attempting to move from manager to high-performing leader, they need to be people of conviction. They need to be people who bring competence to the table. Obviously, based on what we've already talked about, they've got to be people that are rich in character. And then the last leadership necessity is they, whether they recognize it or not, the good leaders are in covenant with the people that they influence, not just in contract and not just in relationship, but they're in covenant. So when I could put my hands around what I was seeing in these leaders and what I was reading and researching and writing about, I realized in some respects, an effective model of leadership is simple. That doesn't mean it's easy. We all need to work on each one of these elements through the lifetime of our leadership impact, but it's at least a simple construct.
Talk to me about covenant. What does that mean?
What's that?
Talk to me about covenant. You distinguish
covenant
from.
It's interesting. It's kind of an old-fashioned word. Guy Ritchie brought it back into our current nomenclature about 2 years ago with this typical Guy Ritchie movie, deeply meaningful and also deeply brutal movie, that really captured what covenant is. Here in the state of Texas, where I live, the best example for me is a marriage covenant. We've all heard that term, marriage covenant. And, and somebody wants to get married, there's the love and affection for riches and poorness and, till death do us part, all of the warm romantic feelings. And there's also a document that's signed by an officiant and submitted to the local county clerk. There's both a formal and a relational side of things. And when I kind of finally dialed into, this was the last leadership necessity, and I realized here's what's going on. If Aaron is the type of leader that is in covenant with his team members, he's responsible to a P&L, and he's got KPIs that show up on his dashboard, and he's holding people accountable to perform. There's a formal side of his CEO-ness. Oh, and then you also find out 18 months later that he personally cashed in a bunch of frequent flyer miles for one of his team members who had a parent struggling with cancer 3 states away. Nobody needed to know about it. It went beyond the HR manual. It was the right thing for that leader to do. They have both a formal and a relational side to their leadership influence. And, the best leaders I've worked with, the HR policy says 2 weeks of PTO, but that person got 4 weeks of PTO last year because they needed it. And that doesn't mean that the CEO let them off the hook for their performance criteria. It's the challenge, the tension of, I'm in covenant and I've got to hold Andy responsible. We've got some performance criteria that we have to meet. And I am going to be human in my relationship with Andy. And so, Aaron, that's really the leadership covenant that I think every good leader engages in.
That's great.
It holds the tension between, we talk about this all the time, but it holds the tension between being mindful of what does a human need and being CEO, like this is what the HR manual says, like that there's that balance between, that art and science of leading.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what I love about y'all's approach, because, we all remember that crying CEO a couple of years ago on LinkedIn when he had to do a layoff. And, part of that, and I looked like, on the one hand, I appreciate that. On the other hand, suck it up, Buttercup. You've got shareholders and constituents and clients. You're responsible for the future of this business. It's not going to be around for your other 700 people 2 years from now if you don't do the hard things that are required of a CEO. And you said it, Chris, this is a dynamic tension. You never know if you've got it right or not. You're always...
Well, it's right for now. It's right in this moment.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The mindful part is that you're living in the present moment, and you do feel that pain. I mean, I when I had my bakery back in the day, we had 40 employees, and I was pretty shitty at the P&L side. It was all heart, and that really did not work. It really wound up being just a complete. So it's funny. It was a complete and wild and stunning success from a relational side, and the people that that we train there have gone on to do great things. And but from a business perspective, it was not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I learned that lesson really, really well. I mean,
Well, and to your credit, Aaron, I mean, I think at the end of the day, when all of us are approaching our last breath, I think most of us would say, I'd rather be known as being too gracious
yes,
than being too hard.
I
But there is a price to pay if you're in the C-suite for that graciousness, right? And you've got whoever your constituency is, they're expecting you to perform.
totally. And I've said that when I train salespeople, in this, I often say, look, no one ever gets on their deathbed and thinks, oh, I can't believe I didn't close that sale. You're never going to say that. That's never going to happen. You will say, I wish I had seen more soccer games with my kid.
Yeah.
I will say that. So let's just keep what's important. And you don't get to see any soccer games if you don't have a job. I mean,
Exactly right.
you got, it's attention. It's attention for now. What's appropriate for now?
Yeah. Well, and even saying it fully inside the business world, I would agree. I don't think anybody's laying on their bed saying, wish we could have gotten to 20% EBITDA instead of saying, I wish I could have had my manager stay with me longer and really become freer in their responsibilities. Right?
And then there's that world. So you talk about the crying CEO, and I forget the CEO that, raised everyone's minimum salary to 70K, and the uproar that caused at the time, and the kind of world that created. And he just recently did an update. And while there were a whole bunch of allegations against him, and I don't want to get into his personal life, the business has succeeded, and there's a mass documentation of, when your employees are happy, they're higher performers.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
You just get, you need less of them, and you definitely can work it out if you're in the world of being able to work it out.
Yeah. As it Stephen Covey, I think, said, more than 25 years ago, people join organizations for the job. They leave because of their boss.
100%.
That's to the point we're talking about.
Yeah, and more than 25 years ago. I mean,
yeah,
that's
back when you guys both had hair. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's true. That's funny.
Very true.
So can you, Andy, take me to conviction for a minute? Because I feel like one of the things, and this is maybe specific to someone who's trying to find their purpose. I feel like, Aaron, mindful CEOs are sort of bringing an element of purpose and impact to the world.
Yeah.
And I think underneath that is conviction. How do you find conviction, Andy? How does that work? Tell me more about conviction.
Yeah, great question. So I've been doing leadership development work for more than 20 years ago. 15 years ago, kind of out of the blue, one of my best friends asked me to help him expand his brand. He owned swim schools, franchise swim schools. I was a high school swimmer. I was a very mediocre high school swimmer. But we had moved from Phoenix, where my friend Ron lived, to Austin, and he asked us to help him expand his franchise swim schools to Texas. I knew very little about swim lessons or swim schools. Chris, 15 years later, I can tell you 97 little kids have drowned in Texas this year. It's a nationwide epidemic, and unfortunately, Texas competes with Florida and California year in and year out for the worst award any state would want to win because of all of the water. I have become passionate about something that I was interested in, but then I dived into it, and now I'm full of conviction. And in fact, we're going to talk about leadership for the next 20 minutes or so. I will tell you, in some respects, I put my head on my pillow every night thanking the Lord that I got to lead a team that did 207,000 swim lessons between our 5 swim schools here in Central Texas last year. Something that 25 years ago, when I was doing all my leadership launching, wasn't on the radar. But this interest and this commitment has become a passion of mine now. And so I think one of the things that the CEOs that listen into you ought to recognize is, there are some people that I think are naturally wired as passionate people. They're the high D's or the high I's on that personality profile thing, and they wake up with fire in their belly. There are a lot of us who have interests, and when we dive in, conviction grows. Part of that, I would also say, Chris, for frontline managers is recognizing you got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Managers have their eyes down. Leaders make sure their eyes are up and they're watching the horizon. What's the competition look like? What's the international play look like? What's the market dictating? They've got to have a bigger picture.
Yeah, that's
What's that?
it's the Simon Sinek find your why.
Yeah,
That's that's
exactly.
that world, Chris. We were talking, Andy, earlier about Cottybomple. So people listening to the show regularly know that that's sort of our flag.
A new favorite term.
Yeah, and that requires, so the way we've distinguished that is the difference between a goal and an intention. That there's a goal, there's a specific target, that's your KPI, that's your
Yeah.
quarterly target or whatever, that's a goal.
Right.
That's not an intention. An intention's a direction.
Okay.
Attention is where we're headed. We talk about finding your true east around here, right? We stole that from my friend who said we used to have it as your true north, but his idea that I co-opted was once you go north, once you get north, you're done. But there's always east to go. And, you never get east. You just head east. And I think that's a really, really salient point, is that you're not going to get there. It's not about getting to a point. It's about consistently moving in a direction that matters. So there's never going to come a point when all children are safe to swim.
Right.
That's not the point. You're never going to get all children safe to swim. It's, did we move closer to that today than yesterday?
Exactly right.
And that's
So 2 comments. First, Aaron, I have to ask you, do you know the 3 rules of facilitation? Here's the 3 rules in a nutshell. When I hear a really good idea that I want to share in one of my upcoming leadership training workshops, I'll say, man, I was on with Aaron and Chris, and Aaron said this thing about true east rather than true north. That's the first time. Second time, hey, I heard somebody mention that we always keep moving east. By the third time, can I share with the rest of you an idea that I think would really be helpful to you? And they walk out of my training thinking, man, that Andy is just smart. He shared that true east idea. So Aaron, you got 3 workshops and then it's mine. All right.
Right. Help yourself. Like I said, I stole it from one of our earlier guests.
Yeah, well, and you get past Jesus and Marcus Aurelius, and there's really nothing new in leadership. So it's all just rehash. But the thing that I did want to come back to, Simon Sinek and that famous viral video of his, Start with the Why. The only asterisk that I put around that sometimes, particularly with the emerging leaders I work with, is I'm not sure a 27-year-old knows what their why is yet, and I'm not sure they should. And so part of why I said a couple of minutes ago, what are you interested in? Lean into that, and I think some of those interests are going to become the areas of conviction for you.
Totally.
It's all right. Don't feel guilty if you don't know what your why is.
Totally. And that's the joy of a cottywomple. The other metaphor that we've used, and that you can, I don't know, you have kids?
I've got a grown daughter. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if you've ever read to her Harold and the Purple Crayon when she was younger. Do you know that story?
Yeah.
And it's just about taking the crayon for a walk. You're just going to see what opens up. And, you followed the crayon as it drew. Swimming was important, and that was what was important next. And you were like, oh, let's see where this goes. And then, and if you give that enough space, it can turn into something. If you're not demanding that it produce a specific result in a specific amount of time, and you're not you can have benchmarks along the way,
right?
You're not forcing it. You're like, okay, well, what could be next out of this? Which is, which is really the space of being mindful is, okay, I can tap into what the universe is asking me to do next.
Yeah.
And trusting that that next is going to turn into whatever is going to open up whatever's after that. But I don't have to see whatever's after that now.
Right.
I don't need to have it's just moving further east. I don't need a north. I don't need a spot. I need a direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
Great point. And some of those aren't going to be the direction, right? I spent a season of my life early on in nonprofit fundraising work for organizations that I believed in. Very satisfying work, but ultimately that wasn't the thing that fully satisfied me. And so I said no to
moved in
that.
that direction, but you couldn't see that that wasn't it until you got closer. And then as you got closer, you were like, oh, there's a new.
Yeah.
And I would bet you it's all directionally accurate. It's even that led to the next thing. So it's in the right direction. It is the direction. You just don't need a specific, this is my why, like stone carved into stone. This is it. No, I know my why is. So you talked about followers on Instagram, and it triggered something in me because I've said this for years in other work that I lead, when I train leaders. And that's, the true measure of the normal, ordinary designation, and certainly in the Instagram, TikTok, social media era, it's how many followers do I get? And the true mark of a leader isn't how many followers I have, it's how many leaders did I create? How many people around me did I empower to find their leadership?
Yeah.
And that's a distinction that I don't think people really do have today, and it's lost in this whole thing about how many followers I got.
Well, and part of the challenge of that is mindful CEO side. If you are birthing leaders rather than followers, some of them are going to leave.
Totally.
And you train somebody up and then they're gone. And of course,
that's got to be okay with you. That's got to
be okay.
Otherwise,
because the alternative is you don't train them and they stay mediocre and they stay with you. So
that would be the worst, right?
Yeah, that would be the worst.
Is that you wind up with a whole bunch of mediocre managers.
Yeah.
Versus, the right leaders,
pipeline of good leadership.
Yeah. Isn't that it's got to be in Tom Collins's work. I know that's
it showed up someplace in there. Yeah.
Is that we're creating that level of
good point.
New leadership. We're breathing life into it.
Yeah.
And then people, when I had the bakery, that was a big aha for me. So it was I got involved with a company called Landmark Education, Landmark Worldwide. They do transformational educational programs, and I still lead programs for them today. And that's the world in which this Leaders Causing Leaders arose for me. Is that
concept?
Is in there. And when I first started putting people through the forum as part of I was like, okay, people around me need to do this. And I would lose employees. I'm going to quit now and I'm going to go move to England and write poetry. All I could think of was, this is fabulous. This is fabulous. This is great. This person now has something that they didn't have.
What they need.
What's that?
What they need.
Yeah, they have what they need to move on to their next step.
Conviction.
Yeah. And if we can just, that's a deathbed conversation worth having. Is that we're freeing people into that space. Andy, when you lead these workshops, I got a question for you. What's the obstacles that people run into as you breathe life into these ideas?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's probably two different obstacles. One is this mistaken understanding that celebrity influencers are leaders. And so my goal is to start my own podcast. My goal is to amass followers, and I'm at the top of the food chain, when what you talk about and what we've been talking about for the last 25 minutes, the best leaders are at the bottom rather than the top, right? And so I run into that. And then the other thing I run into is Andy, this is great theory, and I got to get ready for the board meeting tomorrow, and our EBITDA is supposed to be 18%, and we're at 15%. What plans am I going to bring to the table to make it better next quarter? And that tension of, yeah, this sounds great, Andy, when I'm in a half-day leadership training thing with you, but in the meantime, I've had, my daily 300 emails come in, and they're requiring my attention.
Yeah. And what's the path for them? What's the path out? What's the resolution of that for them?
Man, if we could all figure that out, we could bottle that and move to Tahiti, I think. I think it's like so much of what we've talked about there. This tension never goes away. You've got to be responsible to the CEO side of your mindful CEO. You can't let that go away while you wrestle with the mindful side. And that's, I don't think anybody ever gets that right. But the very fact that you and I are challenging the people that we're in front of, hey, don't just have the CEO have the mindful in front of you.
Yeah.
And if they wrestle with it, we've done our work, right? I don't think anybody ever gets it right, but if they wrestle with it, we've done our work.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer, Andy, is that there is no resolution. There's just engaging, wrestling.
Yeah. I remember one of my graduate school professors many years ago talked about the difference between static equilibrium and dynamic equilibrium. Said you got a bowl, you got a marble. Static equilibrium, you drop the marble in the bowl, and eventually it just kind of sits there. What we're talking about is dynamic equilibrium, where the bowl is upside down. You still got the same bowl, you got the same marble, but you're always having to do this with the edge of the bowl to keep the marble up at top center. It's a lifetime challenge.
It's good.
I like that. Yeah. Tell me, can you walk me into competence and character a little bit? Because I feel like to keep that equilibrium, it's going to require some competence and some character.
Yeah.
You can't not develop yourself and hope it goes okay.
Yeah. Juliet Straw and her fellow researchers published the book, The Work of Leaders, about 10 years ago, I think. And it was this exhaustive study. I think they cross-referenced 300 other leadership resources, trying to distill down what's one of the things that makes a leader and not just a manager. And they ended up recognizing the ability to get your team to execute competence was a key determiner of high impact leaders. And I think, Chris, it's both, do you and I have the competence of leadership where all of a sudden our job has changed from being frontline, from being the project manager to being the organizational manager? Can we step back and learn how to lever those levers? But the other half of it also is, do we put in place the criteria to allow our teams to execute? Can we help them become more and more competent in their jobs? So do we have those clear goals? Do we have a dashboard that we're helping them look at regularly? Do they know what they're being measured by in terms of P&L or cash flow or balance sheets? So becoming more competent as a leader requires you to help your team members really push further into their ability to execute well.
That reminds me, Aaron, of when we talk about marathons and having 26 miles as an obstacle, because it develops you to run 26 miles. Like that you can think of KPIs and goals and targets as the obstacles you invent and create as a leader to develop competency in the people in your organization, because it gives them the tension, or it gives them the obstacles to overcome, which creates the skill or the competency.
Yeah, the goals, inside that world, Andy, it's the fuller conversation on that is look, if the point was going 26 miles, you'd get in your car. If the point was to get to the end, you would just get in the car. There's definitely easier ways to get there than run it.
Yeah.
The point is the obstacle. The point is to overcome that. And if we can keep the container, the context of the KPI is, okay, this is what we need as an organization to develop ourselves next, then that's what that's going to be. It also short circuits the upset that happens, that inevitably happens every time we hit a goal. We're going to get a bigger goal.
Yeah.
right? No, of course we're going to get a bigger
The
goal.
meetings will continue until morale improves.
Well, that's the current frame of CEO-ness is, okay, thanks for, for doing that. What's next? But if it's inside the container of this is a development opportunity, then it's okay, I hit that. Now what? It becomes a whole different conversation. If we can enroll people in the opportunity of a lifetime of development in our organization, then we've got the right leaders, then they're hungry for that. They're like, okay, I can run a marathon. Let me start talking ultra marathons or triathlons or whatever.
Well, it's interesting. I've done a lot of work with sales teams over the years, and my most effective work with sales teams is when I get to work with the sales managers on coaching this iterative, at least once a month, 30-minute conversation where you're helping them move from 3 miles to 5 miles to 7 miles to a half marathon. And if you just show up at the annual review cycle and you haven't been coaching them along the way, you're not really leading them well because you're not helping them stretch themselves. I think, these leadership conversations, all three of us would agree. As we reflect on this, managers get the easy conversations. Leaders get the hard conversations. If there's something that defines a leader, it's that the hard conversations end up on his or her desk all the time. How are you doing it leading into those? Yeah, now, Andy, we've got you to 3 miles. Now we want to get you to a 10K, and here's what it's going to take. Let's touch base along the way every quarter to see how your running plan is going.
Yeah,
I think that dovetails into character, because in order for you to pull that off, there's a certain character conversation that happens. Like, who do you know yourself as? And if who you know yourself as is somebody who just puts in the bare minimum versus someone who wants to reach for more, that to me is a character conversation.
Yeah. Well, and that again puts the leader at the bottom of the pyramid instead of top of the pyramid, right? Do they trust you? Do they know you're fair-minded and even-tempered and other-oriented and honest and all of those character traits? Again, we've talked for 30 minutes here about leadership lessons. I think some of the best lessons we learn at times are from anti-mentors. I was working at a Fortune 500 technology company a number of years ago where I was working with one of their sales teams in a sales workshop, and their managers were sitting in the back of the room on their laptops. First of all, I hate that context. That's just the wrong thing. Their leaders should be in the engagement with them. But I was just serving a client. They're in the back on their laptops, just whispering away. And I can't remember what something came up, but something came up in the back of the room about somebody who was lacking character. One of these managers said something or did something, and it came out that selfishness and at any rate, Chris and Aaron, I saw in the next few minutes kind of this nonverbal percolate through the whole room of disgust and disappointment and frustration, and I didn't know the backstory. I was just the hired gun who came in to help them go from A to B. But by the end of my half day with them, he had lost the right to lead because of a character issue that whispered about in his team. And it's trust is hard to build and it's quick to destroy. And really the character piece is vital to that.
There's the best, you're saying there's nothing new after Jesus or Marcus Aurelius, but there's a Lao Tzu saying that we used to lean in on big in my leadership trainings was it was a quote, something like, go to the people, learn from them, love them, and in the end the people will say we did it ourselves. And that's what you're talking, they've got to have, if they don't say they did it themselves, you lost, you failed.
But it takes us back to your point a few minutes ago where good leaders are building leaders, they're not building followers.
It's 100%. And that's none of that do you get really on the Instagram and that whole thing.
Exactly right.
Well, it's hard because there's a space in which, in my own metaphorical marathon of 26 miles, I'm trying to push myself to prove that I can get to the that I can be the version of me that does 26 miles. And for me, it can be easy to forget that I'm not doing this for me, I'm not trying to prove something for me, but I'm doing this for them. So when they take the credit, to Lao Tzu's quote, when they're like, oh yeah, like I did this, I'm like, dude, I just spent the last 10 years trying to push myself so that I could be the version that helped you do that thing. And Chris's need to pat himself on the back, Chris's need to validate the effort he put in to prove he could be the version of himself that pulled it off. I have to be mindful of that because otherwise my ego will kind of step in and want,
well,
pat on the back.
that's the definition of humility that I love, right? You have to stay humble, and it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
I think it's
and one of the things for me, because Chris, I struggle with that same thing, is I want to be recognized. I got to start my day the right way by doing some of these exercises we're talking about, right? I call it the leader's hour, and it's reflection and journaling, some spiritual disciplines, and I think that leads to the truth that we all share with our followers regularly. Leaders need to lead themselves first, and you'll never lead other people if you're not leading yourself. And
there's your Ram Dass, Chris, is that all I can do for you is work on myself. That's and the guy in the back of the room is an example of someone who's unwilling to work on themselves. Because I promise you, had that guy owned the thing, had he said, wow, that is so inappropriate that I am that way with you, that I cannot believe that I spent my entire career being that way with people, and I got it. It may take me some time to work it out, but I am going to work that out. I promise you, not only would he not he would have gained exponential power to lead.
Good point.
Because it's never about the mistake, it's about, can you own the mistake? And you be responsible for, that's what I did, and this is what now I've worked on I can see it in myself. And that promise you, he only lost it because he was unwilling to
be vulnerable about it.
Unwilling to be responsible for it. They did that.
Well,
yeah, it's great.
Well, maybe what final thoughts? I mean, if we had to wrap it up, Andy, with your thoughts, what you wish everybody knew about leadership.
Well, first of all, I don't want to wrap it up. I've found two brothers in arms here, and we could pick each other's brains. Yeah, let's just keep going. I think this awareness that leadership comes out of our own stories, right? What has life taught us that we've learned well from? Aaron, that's your point from the guy in the back of the room. If he had learned and swallowed what he needed to learn, he wouldn't have lost his platform of leadership. So, we all need to learn from the stories that got invested in us, whether they're anti-mentor stories or whether they're rich in character servant leader stories from the biography of the greatest leader who ever lived. We need to learn, and then they need to become our own stories. What's that? And then I think, Chris, this whole recognition that all three of us have really articulated, leadership is really a humble thing. It's not a braggadocious thing. That's why I love even the phrase, the mindful CEO. For many people, that's a contradiction in terms right there. And yet when we can channel that and recognize it's not about me, I think we're beginning to discover some of the keys to high-performing leadership.
Yeah, it's good. I love that. Well, if people want to learn more about your work or connect with you, what's the best place to do that?
A couple of resources, neillieleadership.com, and like you guys, I blog regularly. I've got some podcasts up there, Neillie Leadership. The other thing is, my coach about a year ago said, Andy, you ought to make some of your thoughts available. I've got a little ebook at leadershipmaterials.com that really talks about the 3 imperative leadership conversations. How do you lead one of these hard conversations we talked about 10 minutes ago? what's a simple tool for coaching your team members? So I've got a developmental coaching model in there. And then the other thing that's so appropriate for the two of you is recognizing that a lot of leadership needs to live in affirmation. And how do you celebrate well with your team members? So 3 different leadership conversations, the affirmation conversation, the coaching conversation, the hard conversation. Leadershipmaterials.com. There's a simple download.
Excellent.
Thanks,
All right,
Andy.
great.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we put that in the show notes, and when it goes out in the email, that'll be a link in the email for sure for people to pick that up. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, just really, I just can't thank you enough for the work that you do in the world, because, you know, like Margaret Mead said, don't ever doubt that a small group of people can make the difference. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And, you know, we're all moving in that direction. And in today's climate and what's available as a demonstration of leadership is sorely lacking the conversation that we had today. And I really can't say enough about people that are taking this on in the face of the headwinds that exist today. So really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, gentlemen. What a privilege. I've found 2 soulmates, and I love what you're doing.
Thanks, Andy. Hey, those of you listening, if you'd like to give us a good review, because we love good reviews, if this is adding something to your life, take a moment and say thanks by giving us a review on whatever podcast directory you listen to. You can also go to themindfulceo.com and click on the contact link in the navigation if you want to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Aaron?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, just share this episode if it made a difference, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. All right, take care, everybody. See you next time.